All right, now we go to the investment side of psychedelics and how to evaluate the different categories, companies, and evolving landscape to identify the best opportunities. Moderating our panel is Jeff Zuber. Jeff is a founder of Zuber Lawler, a law firm focused on intellectual property and litigation with an increasing focus on psychedelics. He's represented clients in corporate disputes within the plant medicine industry for more than a decade. He's also a founder of Psychedelia Magazine. Welcome, Jeff Zuber.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. It is my honor to introduce these three panelists. First, closest to me is Michael Huttner. Michael is an investment banker, corporate and political strategist, attorney, author, and entrepreneur. He's the founder and CEO of Next Titan Capital, where he oversees capital raises and M&A transactions. And Michael initiated and served on the steering committee of the Colorado Natural Medicine Act, which will decriminalize and provide therapeutic systems for psilocybin, DMT, ibogaine, and mescaline. And as most of you probably know by now, that measure has passed. Also with us is Scarlet Masius. Scarlet has a passion for creative initiatives that nurture the growing psychedelic community and currently serves as the head of community at Tactogen, an early-stage drug discovery and development company focused on creating accessible medicines for mental wellness. Scarlet also is a board member at the North Star Project. And on the end is Simeon Schnapper. Simeon is the founding partner of JLS, Plant Medicine Fund. He advises several psychedelic and impact startups, is an Aspen Institute Fellow, and a member of the New York Mycology Society. Is that everything, Simeon? Did I hit it all?
That's a good start.
That's what I figured. In fact, many of you probably already know Simeon. First, before we get started with the questions, a quick disclaimer. I'm an attorney, so of course I have one of these. None of the claims and opinions discussed on this stage should be taken as legal or medical advice. This is a discussion, and the opinions are for that purpose only, just discussion. Investing has risks which are more pronounced in this evolving legal landscape, so proceed with caution, friends. Okay, let's begin. First question. How is investing in psychedelics different from other industries like pharma or cannabis?
I'll start that off. I don't know if it's different. There's a lot of similarities to cannabis. There's obviously a lot of similarities to biotech. If you look at cannabis and say it's plant medicine, whether it's for medicinal use or recreational use, you're going to see some of that. And as far as pharma, we're seeing a huge trend. In fact, I think the majority of the investment dollars that has gone into the space was more around drug development and discovery, which is traditionally, pharma biotech.
I think that there's more similarities depending on which industry you're looking at. With cannabis, we're talking about drug policy reform and ending the war on drugs as the core tenet of why we're in this room today. And with pharma and the psychedelic ecosystem, when we look a decade down the road, there's not going to be a huge difference between the two ecosystems when we're considering drug development and discovery. The main tenet here, what feels different, is coming at this from a standpoint of having ethical alignment and being able to develop a collaborative and community-informed process for building access for all communities who will be impacted by this developing industry.
I would just add that it's exciting for me to be here and with this panel, and great job at setting this up, but I think it's exciting for all of you because we're in a very early stage, and as long as psychedelics continue to be federally illegal, and I'll talk a little bit more in a bit about Colorado and some of the efforts there, but it really provides an opportunity for us because there's a lot of people that have for better or worse, legal counsel otherwise that are hesitant to get it, especially in the United States. So I think there's a real opportunity to learn now, and as things come on board, there should be a great opportunity for people that are in at this early stage.
Now, and we'll start with you here, Michael. What are the most important things you look for when considering a psychedelic investment opportunity?
Sure. So I guess like any other investment, typically because most of these are really novel and new, is we look at the team. The team's absolutely key, and that's largely what we find investors are interested in the team, and they're interested in whether there's the sustainability or a model for sustainability to go the long term, especially in the biotech, which is central to this, to the psychedelic industry. The mistake that we find sometimes is that if you have a team where the CEO is both the chief scientist or the chief researcher, as well as the person that's doing the pitches and raising the money, it's not a good combination. Ideally, you have one or two people that are really leading the capital fundraising efforts and really understand the investment and the financial models, and then a separate team that doesn't get distracted by all that, that's really focused on the research and making progress on whatever they're looking to execute.
Actions speak louder than words. Within the investment space, there is a cadence of people getting on stage saying we're going to solve the mental health crisis. And that's not what's happening. We're just providing more options and more tools in the tool belt for being able to improve people's quality of life. So that's the main thing to watch out for, is whether or not there are actions that are backing up the words that people are saying.
Yeah, I concur with both of my esteemed colleagues' sentiments there. I remember we brought a group together, it was about, Psychedelics is like dog years, so it was 3 years ago. And it was a mixture of, high net worth individuals, people who had invested in cannabis, and they were very curious about psychedelics. So in that convening, we brought a lot of educators, a lot of nonprofits, shamans, psychotherapists, and then the afternoon was spent allowing 3 companies to pitch. And 2 of those companies, one was the first listed company on the NASDAQ, although 3 years ago we think this is a decade away. The other was founder of Decriminalized Nature. Not that that was an investable opportunity, but as we're seeing things happen in Colorado, as we've seen things happen in Oregon, you will start to see some really interesting business models and investable opportunities. So just more or less a comment that, wow, what just happened in the last 3 years? From that first convening where we brought people together thinking this is a value play, it's the right thing to do, there'll be some quality innovation, there'll be certainly alpha and upside and all the investment terms, but we thought that was going to be a decade away. So the fact that there's even public companies, that there's private funding coming into this, that you have this perfect storm of all this amazing university research coming out, you have all this regulatory shift, you have the zeitgeist shifting. About 2 years ago, I believe there was a New York Times article on MAPS and PTSD, and my great uncle called me and he said, son, or Simeon, is this what you're working on? And I'm like, yeah, it's exactly what I'm working on. I've been supporting MAPS for 2.5 decades. I've always been about mental health. And then his response was like, I'm proud of you. I always thought you were a drug dealer. So like that for me was like something has dramatically shifted. And even reflecting on this morning, the opening salvo from Brad, I believe, and who's done psychedelics, whose first conference this is. It's just, generally a comment that it's mushrooming, and I'm just, it's a bit surreal, a bit of a trip that I'm on a stage looking at people at a conference at the intersection of capital and psychedelics. So.
Thank you. And Michael, this next one is for you. And as we discussed, you played an active role in cannabis legalization in Colorado. How does last week's passage of Prop 122 compare from a business opportunity standpoint?
Well, yeah, I had the good opportunity back about 12 years ago to pull together the first cannabis meeting to get adult use legalized, and then just a few years ago, I figured I had that experience. I pulled together a group in Colorado to get psychedelics legalized, and took a few years, and with the help of a lot of folks in this room and others, we passed it just last week, about 52, just under 52%. I think the one thing that I've realized is is it's really important how we speak about both cannabis and about psychedelics. What we found, and we actually did quite a bit of public polling on this, is how you communicate it makes a real difference on how much support and how much people are open to it. When we polled with psychedelics, the absolute worst way you could describe it is talk about what they commonly refer to as magic mushrooms. And unfortunately, what you see still in the news, even when we try to change it in Colorado, is the shorthand is usually magic mushrooms. So it'd be kind of like calling cannabis, Acapulco Gold or Maui Wowie. It just doesn't, it's not a positive, and it drops about 20%. So the worst way is magic mushrooms. Psychedelics is somewhere in the middle. And then the best way you could describe it is natural medicines. And it was something we kind of looked at. We didn't think we'd get it through, but we kind of looked at, Whole Foods, they sell natural medicines. Why not? And it is medicine, as we all know. So it's important that we stop getting away from the language that's kind of been tagged or kind of, is kind of, street language, and get more into your natural medicines, which I think is just a more popular way to describe things.
Thank you. Scarlet, you helped launch a new kind of community investment program at Tactogen. Can you describe how it works and how it might help other psychedelic companies find new sources of funding?
Absolutely. So yesterday we publicly launched a community stakeholder initiative to allow the public to be able to get equity before we go into Series A fundraising. So the SEC changed their regulation in 2012 alongside the Jobs Act to allow for unaccredited investors to be able to get equity in companies that are raising resources for rounds. And in 2016, that further shifted to put money allotments, first starting at 1 million, now it's up to 5 million a year from unaccredited investors. And the way it works is it's no matter how many unaccredited investors, it all goes into one entry in the cap table. For Tactogen, that's Dr. Victoria Hale, who's an incredible human being. She was chairperson for MAPS for a number of years. She's a MacArthur Fellow who, through her work, made malaria medication available globally in an accessible way, and then shifted focus to reproductive health and made a handful of contraception opportunities for women to be able to have accessible health options. And so having her as the front runner acts as a demonstration towards the actions speak louder than words, that when people get on stage and they talk about access, being able to draw from the models that have existed across other industries and tapping into that to be able to understand how we can build out the models that actually bring the psychedelic ecosystem broadly to the world. And so it's less about a fiscal goal and more about having it as a model for the consideration of access. Tactogen's focused on accessible medicine for all, and access has a lot of different modalities that are attached to it. So when we're talking about fiscal access and value creation within the ecosystem, who gets to participate? Is it just VCs and investors who've always been able to tap in early and be able to engage in value creation? Or do we get to engage in community stakeholder growth alongside the organizations that are profiting from this industry?
Thank you. Simeon, through JLS Fund, you've been an early investor in many of today's leading psychedelic businesses. What are you hearing from those founders about the current landscape and the outlook ahead?
It's actually, we went through a contraction here. I remember going through, several markets where there was FOMO and all this exuberance and .com, blockchain, cannabis, and it feels like this has already happened here, that any of that sentiment of it's hard to raise capital, or I think in aggregate, at least the pubcos out there are down about 75% in aggregate. We welcome that because there was this mad rush, and you saw that with other industries, just getting in there, following similar playbooks to how one might raise capital. But internally, we're seeing amazing companies, all the companies we've invested in, which we always commit to support till whatever the quote-unquote exit is, are doing extremely well. And we're seeing a lot higher caliber and a lot higher quality of company, whether it's a drug discovery company, whether it's a virtual reality company, whether it's a education technology company and training, the next 100,000 psychedelic psychotherapists. So it's a really great time now if you have capital and you're in it for the long run. And the companies that are coming up, or those that did start and started to raise, I think it's, at least in our view, incredibly positive, regardless of what somebody's day trader portfolio might look like today.
We're already, and hopefully, toward the end of one boom and bust cycle evaluations. What do you see on the investing landscape right now, and how do you think it will look over time, over the next 12 months, 3 years, 5 years? Michael, why don't you start?
Sure. I think as Simeon pointed out, and most people know, the past 12 months have been challenging. 12 months ago, it literally was about 12 months ago this month that it really took a turn where there was all the exuberance and huge investments and a lot of IPOs. And now it's been, anybody that's been raising money in the space knows that it's been a long haul. I feel like the summer was probably the worst of it, and now it's getting better because people, when they really look at these companies, they're real. Not the ones that, if you're starting a company now, it's a little bit, maybe not too late, but certainly late to start. But a lot of these companies, have been at it for just bootstrapping for, the past 1 or 2 or 3 years. And they are starting to get results. They're starting to get studies that are coming out. And I think as the word spreads, it's spreading all over the place, as everybody knows, both in the U.S. and elsewhere, that there's real results from a lot of the psychedelics that we're talking about. So we expect this year to be quite a bit better than the last year. And what I found just in our own experience at Next Titan Capital is we're starting to get a lot of incoming, both not only companies that are making moves and scaling up, but also quite a bit of investors that are coming to us that we hadn't heard from in quite some time.
I think what we're bearing witness to is the breaking of the wave of the hype machine, and that's something to be cautious of when entering into this space. Back to that refrain of, the grandiose visions of inflated language that you've seen across decades with the SSRIs, how they were going to revolutionize mental health care, and the long-term effects that we've seen for their lack of impact. The .com space and the tech space, where disrupting the world and making it better with a SaaS solution, Cannabis space, and now Psychedelic Space. And it's like, where do you find the grounded reality within all of the inflation that you're seeing within language? And so I think that it's an interesting space right now, like saturation. You were talking about that it might be like a little bit too late to get into the space from a mental health context. And it's interesting because in terms of like predicting the future, I think that we're going to see this movement, and it's already happening, from mental conditions and indications to physical. And at least on my end, what I'm excited about, and it's coming a little bit from a selfish context because I have a gut and autoimmune disorder, but seeing what's happening with the gut-brain axis and being able to develop further on that path is an untapped resource that's worth considering. Especially everyone talks about 5-HT2A receptors and serotonin, and like 90% of serotonin is made in your gut. And the vagus nerve is the largest nerve in your system that connects your stomach to your brain. So there's a lot of interesting movement there. There's the short-term solutions that are like people just slap psychedelic on it, like digital healthcare solutions that are always an easy bet. But for the long-term trajectory with drug development and discovery, which is where most of the industry is focused outside of education initiatives and clinic development, that's a long haul. You're talking about from inception that it could be anywhere from 7 to 10 years, and there's no guarantee that that's actually going to make it all the way through FDA approval. So that brings back to kind of the risk dynamic when thinking into the future.
Yeah, I would opine on that as well, and just go personal. I remember I opened the world's first psychedelic art gallery, medical marijuana dispensary in 2008, and then in 2012 I'm like, this is going nowhere. So I sold it. Still in kind of in the same vein, I remember buying a bunch of crypto, Bitcoin specifically, like at $2 and thinking I was a genius and selling it at $5, then buying a bunch at 400, selling it at 1,700. I think it was around 10 grand is where I dumped most of my bag on that. So I just look at those two personal experiences where it's like, this is over, or it's gonna be too difficult, or it's not gonna grow, and then reflect on where psychedelics are at in the psychedelic ecosystem. I think although, optically it looks like there's contraction and it's hard, it's really, if the premise and the thesis is centered around the human condition, that's kind of infinite. We're a very messy species. So I kind of think it's even, I don't know, like, it's not a sports metaphor. If it's the first mile of the marathon, it's like 7 months before the marathon, you're eating a bag of Doritos, and somebody says you should run a marathon. Like, that's where we're at in this ecosystem.
Thank you. Many investors seem predominantly focused on the medical side of psychedelics, on patents and IP and the fastest routes to FDA approval. Are people missing opportunities on the non-medical side in Oregon, in Colorado, and in international jurisdictions? Why don't we start with you, Scarlet?
Yeah, shout out to Amanda Ryman, getting into education initiatives and making sure that the public is as well aware as possible about these emerging medicines that are coming to market. We're experiencing the pollinization effect, as I call it. How to Change Your Mind came out, and all of a sudden there was this wave of like my parents being interested in psychedelic-assisted therapy and middle America, and I live in rural Florida, so like rural South. Being engaged in a particular capacity, Netflix, everything, and making sure that alongside the media hype and coverage, that there's a robust ecosystem for education. And it's not just for the public itself. There's all of the programs that are popping up to train therapists. But when we consider access and we consider opportunities for providing more training opportunities, there's still a big stigma, especially knowing what I know for where I'm living, that like not everyone is going to feel comfortable going to a therapist for this kind of care. And not everywhere has therapists, but everywhere has nurses, and everywhere has doctors. And so this consideration, and especially with the nursing community being able to drive education initiatives so that there's robust ecosystem for that support, regardless of whether someone's existing in a rural or urban environment.
Simeon?
I was daydreaming. What was the question?
The question is, are people missing non-medical opportunities?
Yeah, no, in all seriousness, it's funny, I bumped into a cultivator I worked with 15 years ago in the lobby, and he's like, dude, are you wearing a suit? And I said, yes, and he's like, what happened to your dreads? I'm like, times change. And he pitched me on effectively a CBG product. There's definitely room for it. You're seeing it in microdosing. Using functional mushrooms with the anticipation of adding, psilocybe, some cool things happening around amanita. There'll always be a recreational market. Whether it's regulated fully or not remains to be determined. Our thesis is that will be a drop in the ocean compared to medicalization. The fact that those, especially with intractable diseases, severe mental health disorders, not even the next narrative of how psychedelics could help with neurodegenerative diseases from Alzheimer's to Parkinson's. The rec side is going to be vibrant. And that's not to say, a multi-billion-dollar industry is in value, but it's going to be a drop in the ocean compared to, my dad going to his doctor and I have a little pain or I'm a little under the weather, and then Blue Cross Blue Shield reimbursing him for his psilocin pills or whatever it might be.
At Next Titan Capital, we kind of classified them. There's about 6 types of verticals, if you will. The first, and the one that certainly is the one that we see the most and has the most interest from investors is the research and biotech. The others, though, another one that we have, the second one is kind of a diversified platforms that kind of cut across the entire industry to pull together different psychedelics and different populations. The third is a lot of people are familiar here in the States, is setting up clinics, and specifically ketamine clinics is really the primary. And I think a lot of these folks are preparing the kind of the infrastructure, if you will, so when things move forward here, they'll already have the clinics set up and ready to take on other things besides ketamine. That'd be the third. The fourth is really just health data plays, kind of the IP, sort of similar to the platform, but a little bit more specific just on data. The fifth would be retreats and places where people can go and get away. Some of these are in the States, a lot of these are in Central America and so forth. And then the sixth is there's some folks, certainly in Canada and even starting to be here in the States, where they have the needed licenses for GMP certified to basically provide psilocybin or other things to the companies that are researching. So those are sort of the six verticals, and I still think though the first vertical, the research, really is the primary driver, but all these verticals have a number of companies, and certainly open to if you're interested in any of those, chatting about this afterwards.
Thank you, Michael. We're going to go to questions now, and these panelists, they're fully immersed in this. They could talk about this all day, so we wanted to provide some more time for questions. So please, if you have any questions, submit them. We have a couple in now. The first question, and we'll start with you, Simeon. What's an average timeline for a psychedelic startup?
It depends on the category. Michael espoused 6 different, potential categories. They're all different. If it's drug discovery and development, that could be like a decade. To commercialization. Now, there's ways to invest in companies, even that are preclinical. They get something in the clinic and they become an asset that could be acquired. So that can be minimized depending on what the strategy of the company is. We're in a lot of digital therapeutics, virtual reality, those timelines, from first funding to seed into an A, a B, maybe an IPO, maybe an acquisition. We've seen some of those, with some coming up that we deployed into like 2.5, 3 years ago, talking about acquisition opportunities. So it really depends on the business model. Standalone clinics, for example, some of them are incredibly successful, incredibly great businesses. No plans of exiting. They just want to, maybe do some dividend stuff, some payback, and just have a really successful, healthy business. So it really depends on what category of business, and that'll affect the timeline.
Anything to add, or shall I move on to the next? What can an online educational platform geared toward therapists and other wellness practitioners do in order to make themselves attractive to investors?
Build community. I think one of the things that feels difficult in this space, even with some of us having existed for years or decades, depending on the person, is like taking for granted that community context is a privilege. And a lot of people who are going to be coming to this space, when they go home at the end of the day, they don't have people they can talk to about this field that they're diving into. So a lot of opportunity for community connection and creative envisioning together feels important for being able to have something that's an attractive offering.
I would just add, it was interesting. We did we do a couple investor dinners each year. We've done 2, one in Boulder earlier, and then one we did in San Francisco in June at the Battery Club. And we thought, because it was the Bay Area, that it would be really easy to get a lot of folks there. And quite frankly, it was challenging. And I think the part of the challenge is people are just starting to be like, whether they're openly, almost like out of the closet, to be investing in psychedelics. It's been something that either their counsel has said, you better not go there, or they just in social circles will share it privately, but they don't want to be known as investing in it publicly. So we were able to get folks, but it wasn't it wasn't just like we put it out there and they will come. You really have to reach out, and I guess even here, kudos to Brad and Sarah for pulling together so many folks in an area that's not always easy to network.
I mean, that being said, I do think that once, and kudos to MAPS for all the work over decades to bring us to this point. Once FDA approval hopefully moves through, then that's going to open a wave of investors being interested in putting their resources down in this space.
By the way, there's some great questions coming in. There's no way I'm going to get to all of them. So please feel free to follow up. And if you can't get in touch with any of them, please get in touch with me, and I will certainly put you in touch with them. But going to try and get through as many as possible. I love this question for each of you. What's the favorite investment in psychedelics you've ever made? Start with you, Michael.
Well, I'd have to say, my only investment is starting up the bank. A year ago, I was working for another bank out of New York, and it was a general bank, did kind of just about everything. And me and my partners, we wanted to start something new, so we exited that bank, just about a year ago. We had applied to FINRA to get registered, and it took about 9 months to get approved. In fact, we did have it where they looked at my background and they said, "Are you going to be doing cannabis deals or psychedelic deals?" And I didn't want to lie, so I was like, "Yes." And then they said, "Well, what percentage is going to be cannabis and psychedelics?" And of course, we said, "Oh, well, we really don't know," which we didn't. But it held up our application about 2 or 3 months. And for whatever reason, we did get finally approved, but it isn't easy. And so we are a small boutique investment bank. All we focus on are areas that could help people. And really, at this point, our primary focus is cannabis and psychedelics. And to be fair, we have a pretty decent network, and we have quite a bit going on. But these past months have been challenging as largely raising money. But I think money's starting to free up, and we're starting to see more movement now.
Once again, if we're talking about accessible medicine for all, needing to focus on the organizations that are doing that work. So favorite one, hands down, is Alchemy Community Health Clinic, which used to be called Sage Institute. They're in Oakland, and they do low-income psychedelic-assisted therapy primarily for the BIPOC community. They're incredible. Please write that down, look it up, and donate.
Yeah, I would say hands down, our favorite investment was Tactogen.
Great answer.
No, it's a really hard question, right? Because it's like picking your favorite kid. If you're and you build these relationships with founders, it becomes very familial, and you even love the black sheep of the family. So I've kind of adopted as we're supporting companies, whether through capital or introductions or just strategy and pattern matching, it's really across the board. I mean, this morning it was a portfolio company that immortalized the parotid gland in the Sonoran desert frog so that we could biosynthesize something that is indecipherable from, although it's not a plant because it's a toad, but indecipherable from the plant medicine. That's really novel right now based on not just the ethical implications, but the scaling implications and how we're seeing 5-MeO as a great therapeutic after, the trials and the science assesses that. I could equally say, an education tech platform we invested where, we met the founders. They were doing a poster session, I remember, somewhat ignored. It was at the 2008 World Psychedelic Forum in Basel. And it was just a student presenting. So it's like to watch a young founder say, wait a minute, this is something, now I'm credentialed, I've been doing this for over a decade, and to be able to support them around a business model that is, an ed tech play for all practical purposes, but like every single one after Tactogen is our favorite.
Thank you.
Dosing in psychedelics, they tend to be small and infrequent. Is most of the business opportunity in clinical or drug patient administration?
Most of the businesses that have real revenue on the books already, some investors only want to invest in companies that already have proven revenue, is in the clinics, is in the ketamine clinics largely that are popping up all over the U.S. And there's even starting to be a little bit of M&A activity. With the longer term, obviously, with the research where there's a real promise there, no, there's not going to be, there's no immediate returns. It's going to be, as Simeon was talking, it could be years and years, but potentially a huge upside there.
I think we're like moving into a space. The recognition, it was said earlier that psychedelics are seen as a service, and the orientation beyond the actual experience feels like what should be focused on, right? The preparation and the integration ultimately is going to give the greater return than the actual experience itself in terms of the time that's spent and the dedication to patient care.
Yeah, I fully concur. And again, like if we're saying the lead here is the compound, the psychedelic, 9 times out of 10, that's a very small, infinitesimal part of one's whole healing journey. And to, repeat what Scarlet said, that preparation time, that integration, everything that's happening around digital therapeutics, wearables, everything in the omics sciences, makes one realize that the business opportunity is, of course, we're leading with the psychedelic right now because we know there's great efficacy. I mean, I was this morning looking at a paper from CAST. It was a 1964 clinical trial on LSD and pain. It's like, we know those worked at some point, but it'll be the services, like whether it's real estate or a clinic or a retreat, and it'll be all the digital therapeutics, all this ancillary stuff will be, I think, the bulk of where you can start to book the revenues and start to scale and start to build community.
Wow, some really great questions. I am not going to get to all of them, as I said. But for all of you, what is your best investment advice you could give? If you could only tell them one thing in terms of getting your returns, risk avoidance, what is the best advice you would give to a psychedelic investor today? I will start with you, Simeon.
Oh, well, then, of course, and again, I'm trying to remember the disclaimer at the beginning, but since it's under the Jobs Act and a crowdfunded thing, I would say Tactogen. And then followed by that is just, it's really hard. It's not as easy to invest in this space. And I think, some of the other panelists were saying, is this, Cannabis 2.0, which it isn't at all. Even if there's some pattern matching that happened with Canadian markets and, a rush to raise capital, it's just, before you invest, really get your handle around what this industry is and how complex and nuanced and regulatory and science. It's more than just, I have a celebrity pre-roll and that's going to get shelf space.
Yeah, completely in agreement with that. Don't follow the hype machine, do the research, and especially focus. There's so many incredible scientists who are doing innovative work who are still at university, and they're worth paying attention to. So it's less about who's getting up and presenting that has a large marketing arm or social media following, and more about the hard research and the beautiful innovation that's coming from it.
I would say more than just about any sector or any industry that I've experienced, the people in the psychedelic space are very much on the same page. It's kind of like almost like an aligned mission that we're all, either because of some kind of personal experience or something that happened with a friend or relative. And what I would recommend is just don't jump in as an investor right away. Not just due diligence on whatever opportunity you're looking at, but just talk with people, whether it's the funds, some of whom are represented here in the room. There's quite a few attorneys that are really getting to know this space. And I haven't had anybody, the cannabis somewhat, but in the psychedelic space, pretty much everybody's been very open. It's amazing to see how the funds actually a lot of times work together and jointly invest on certain efforts, because I think everybody kind of looks up for the greater good. So I would just say, pace yourself and mingle among people here and others, and as you get to know, then you'll have more confidence as an investor.
What are your thoughts on the zebra versus the unicorn?
There is a book called We Will Call It Paula by David Adler that should be required reading for everyone who is considering coming into this space. So I think that we're past this point, regardless of psychedelic industry or just broadly business writ large, of being able to consider shareholder interest and growth at all cost over the state of our world and the state of patient care. So there are enough models that exist now to be able to do good in the world while still being able to get a profit. And it just, the model of unicorns is fading out. It's just not sustainable.
Yes.
Okay. How far away are we from straight-to-consumer psilocybin consumables being legal, including chocolate, gummies, etc.? Looking into your crystal ball.
I would say it depends, obviously, what jurisdiction you're talking about. In the U.S., look, we looked at Oregon. We passed Oregon with psilocybin 2 years ago, and then we took a step further with Colorado, and that'll be implemented first psilocybin and psilocin in the next couple years, and then in 26, it's going to allow for the implementation of therapeutic use of, as I mentioned earlier, ibogaine, mescaline, and DMT. There was a lot of debate whether this is going to be something where you walk into a store and here's the cannabis flower and here's the mushrooms and here's the, this and that. That's one big difference between, I think, the psychedelic and the cannabis space. I think until this is really further understood for medical use, I don't think most of the folks want it for just recreational use. If you want to, come to Colorado, go to Red Rocks, you can do that already, and there's plenty of the parking lot you can buy beforehand. But really, where this is headed is really to help people, and there are, serious. Some of these are like ibogaine and ayahuasca and others is not something you would want to take just recreationally, of course. So I think, I don't know if the end goal, as opposed to cannabis, which the more states that get adult use, I feel the better. I'm not so sure that's the case here.
I think there's always going to be underground and an above ground that exist in parallel. So tapping in off of what you were saying, that the unregulated market is always going to be a factor. And so if we're talking about direct to consumer that exists, it's just not talked about openly. And it's done in community context. It's done in religious and spiritual context. That's already happening. When we're talking about the regulated market, it entirely depends on federal policy, and that could the thing that I feel like is not said enough is that could change so quickly. Even with state policies moving forward, federal can come in and just lock all that down if the right people are in charge, whatever context that means. So.
Yeah, I would concur with all of those statements. I think the keynote speaker, Ethan, made reference to one of the speakers in New York who showed him a menu of some of the delivery services. So one of them, I've noticed, New York, have relabeled one of the SKU items. This is, of course, all 100% illegal, unregulated. But on the menu, in addition to everything else, they are calling it Upper West Side Xanax. And it's being consumed and purchased with aplomb by divorcees. There's a reason they called it Upper West Side Xanax, and it's just, pretty low-grade psilocybin. Not low-grade, but low-dose psilocybin. That, coupled with everything happening in the psychedelic societies that are, mushrooming all over, the rush of decrim, M109, hanging out in Colorado last week it was incredibly surreal. So these are going to get out there in a way. The fact that, we're sitting in a room right now and there's a booth passing out psilocybin chocolates here is pretty phenomenal, that there's a shift in stigma and a shift in the zeitgeist. How that will roll out remains to be determined. And yes, I still, kind of side on the medicalization will be the fastest path, because it's a healthcare system we know. We might hate it, but it's one that's accepted. And that's why, A lot of these companies are going through trials, and that's why that will be the biggest segment for some time to come.
Okay, we've got a minute left, and I am not going to get to all the questions. Please follow up. You came all the way here. Be rude. Follow up again. If you don't have their contact information, you can get it from me. Feel free to grab me in the hallways. But closing remarks, starting with you, Simeon. What is the last thing
yeah, I mean, just in closing, what a great day. Awesome to bump into old friends and new friends. Awesome to be with such esteemed panelists. Awesome job moderating, Mr. Zuber, and yeah, I can't wait to see you all at the happy hour.
This movement and industry wouldn't be possible without it existing as a collaborative effort. And so certainly when looking at this ecosystem and considering the players in it, that's like all of us on the panel and hopefully all of you will engage in a process together to build this. So,
I guess I just give a plug for Colorado. Two things. One is on the implementation of the act that was just passed last week. They're going to appoint, the governor's going to appoint 15 individuals to oversee it. That will be appointed by the end of January, so we'll see some real progress there. The governor is completely on board. I've worked with him for years and years, and he's basically kind of a progressive libertarian, if you will, and he's fully ready to have his department implement what the voters just passed. And then for folks that don't know already, MAPS is going to have their big 5-year annual retreat next June. I think it's June 19th to the 23rd in Denver. So come out to Colorado and we'll see you there.
Okay, that's it. We're done here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to Remind for having us. And again, one more time, please feel free to follow up with us. Thanks so much.
Thanks.